Turkey. When it comes to the Turkish army, sources trace the army's foundation back to the Modu Chanyu of the Xiongnu Empire in 209 BC. But of course, modern history of the army began after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Now, numbers as recent as 2015 report that the Turkish army, along with the rest of the entire Turkish military, have seen a huge growth in their personnel strength, and these numbers are comparable to their strength back in the 2000s. A big contributing factor for this type of growth is the destabilization of Syria as well as Iraq. Now, the Turkish army's motto is peace at home, peace in the world. Turkey's total combat tanks are 3,200, and they have a total of 9,500 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery sit at a total of 1,120, and they have 1,272 towed artillery and 350 rocket projectors. The next nation's army I'm looking at is the nation of Pakistan. So the Pakistan army is a volunteer service, and their primary objective, as well as its constitutional mission, is to really just make sure that the national security and the national unity of Pakistan is really kept in check. It conducts a lot of humanitarian rescue operations at home, as well as participates in a lot of peacekeeping missions which are mandated by the United Nations overseas. Now, the two main branches of the army are the combat arms and the administrative services. All of them consist of several different branches that include army officers, junior commissioned officers, as well as other enlisted personnel. Their motto is a follower of none but Allah, the fear of Allah, strive for Allah. Pakistan's army has 2,200 combat tanks, 3,665 armored fighting vehicles, 429 self-propelled artillery. Their towed artillery count is 1,226, and they have 150 rocket projectors in their possession. The next nation to look at is Egypt. So the Egyptian army is the largest service branch within the Egyptian Armed Forces. The Egyptian Armed Forces Chief of Staff's office is in Cairo, and he's the Chief of Staff of the entire army. There's 3 command and control headquarters and 9 command and control field headquarters, and they're directed from the Chief of Staff's office. The most notable engagements of the Egyptian army, these all happened in the 20th century, and they were Egypt's 5 wars with Israel in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1967 to 1970, and also in 1973. The motto of the Egyptian army is, "We painted the face of our nation on our hearts." They have a total of 2,160 combat tanks. Their armored fighting vehicles sit at a total of 5,735. Their self-propelled artillery count is 1,000 even. Their towed artillery, however, is 2,189, and they have 1,100 rocket projectors. Next up, we have Indonesia. So the Indonesian army is composed of a headquarters as well as 15 military region commands and a strategic reserve command called Kostrad, which is a special forces command, as well as a special forces command Kopassus, and several other units. There are today 5 types of infantry battalions in the Indonesian army, and those are the Power Raider Infantry Battalion, the Mechanized Raider Infantry Battalion, the Raider Infantry Battalion, the Mechanized Infantry Battalion, and the Infantry Battalion. Their motto is unmatchable bird with noble goals. Their combat tanks sit at a total of 315. Their armored fighting vehicles total 1,300. Now their self-propelled artillery are at 141, their towed artillery 356, and they have 36 rocket projectors. The army of the country of Iran is up next. Now the Iranian army is also known as the Artesh. Now Artesh has its own joint staff, which coordinates its 4 separate service branches, which are the ground forces, the air forces, the navy, and the air defense forces. Their headquarters are in Tehran, Iran, and the Iranian army has fought 2 major invasions in modern era. The first one was back in 1941, and this invasion was by the Soviet and the British forces during the time of World War II. The second was in 1980, and that was the Iraqi invasion, which lasted almost 8 years. Their motto is, "And our soldiers, they verily would be the victors." Getting down to the specifics, when we look at their combat tanks, they have 1,634, they have 2,345 armored fighting vehicles, 570 self-propelled artillery, 2,128 towed artillery, and 1,900 rocket projectors. Yeah, they're packing a lot when it comes to the rockets. So we're about halfway in this episode, and I think it's just a great time to let you know about our military playlist as well as our playlist about Islam, because this is what this video is about. So I have a link to a playlist of videos just about the military, the army, navy, special forces, all of that. You'll find a lot about the different countries around our world and see how they run their military and learn about their military power and how they're set up. Then the next playlist is videos just dedicated to the religion of Islam. You'll learn a lot more about the history, a lot more about the beliefs and the differentiations between the different branches of Islam, why the branches of Islam exist, things like that. So I highly recommend that playlist as well. So I'll have two links below in the video description. I'll also link to them in the card section of this episode. And for those of you who don't want to click away from this episode just yet, which I don't recommend doing, finish this one first, I'll have the playlist linked to the end of the episode at the end screen. Okay, moving on to the next country is Saudi Arabia. So the Saudi Arabian army is the largest branch of the Saudi Arabian armed forces. Now, I didn't really find a motto for the Saudi Arabian army, but I did find a motto for Saudi Arabia as a country, and it is, "There is no God but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God." The Saudi army has been active since 1745, and that was when it was an independent service arm. But of course, it's now been an official branch of the armed forces since 1902. And in the year 2000, the Saudi Arabian government, they spent billions of dollars to expand Saudi's forces, including their army, of course. But unfortunately, there's a lot of modern equipment that they had to learn and really introduce into their army. And a lot of the equipment is still not properly understood or even used to this day. Nevertheless, the Saudis have a very powerful army. They have 1,062 combat tanks, 11,100 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery totals 705. Their towed artillery is at 1,818, and their rocket projectors sit at 122. The next country in this list is Algeria. So the Algerian army includes 2 armored and 3 mechanized divisions. Land Forces Command is really responsible for organizing and preparing the land forces so as to ensure the defense of the national land space in cooperation with the other forces in Algeria. Now, the organization of Algeria's land forces is made up of a central command, military and operational sectors, big units, and autonomous units, as well as you'll find training institutions. Now, a lot of their equipment was provided by Russia and various other countries. And the motto for Algeria as a nation is "By the people and for the people." Their combat tanks sit at a total of 2,475. They have 6,900 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery total at 400. Their towed artillery is at 583, and they have 367 rocket projectors. And then Malaysia is our next nation. So the King of Malaysia is the supreme commander of the Malaysian Armed Forces, and the Malaysian Army currently has 17 corps or regiments. Now, these are grouped into 3 main components: the combat element, then there is the combat support element, and then the support element. So the corps and regiments are currently organized into 5 divisions. The first military units in Malaysia can be traced all the way back to March 1861. And then fast forward a bunch of years, the modern Malaysian Army came into existence in January 1933. And their motto is "Strong and Loyal." The Malaysian Army has 74 combat tanks in their possession. They have a total of 1,460 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery sit at 29, and their towed artillery total 211, and they have 54 rocket projectors in their possession. So now, coming down to the end of this list, we have Syria. The Syrian army makes up approximately 80% of the combined services. It officially came into existence in 1945 before Syria obtained full independence the following year. And what we know about the Syrian armed forces is that they have really been involved in suppressing a lot of the political movements within Syria. Their motto is "Guardians of the Homeland." They have 5,035 combat tanks, 5,170 armored fighting vehicles, 500 self-propelled propelled artillery. Their towed artillery total at 2,210, and they have 700 rocket projectors. Alright, so starting off with the first nation at number 10, we have Saudi Arabia with the Saudi Arabian Army. Saudi Arabia surpasses Egypt for the 10th spot of the largest armies in the world. There's a huge amount of money that's being spent on the Saudi Arabian army every single year, and it means that the country has one of the best equipped armed forces. They have a total active personnel of 478,000. Now, the Royal Saudi Land Forces are composed of 3 armored brigades, 5 mechanized brigades, 1 airborne brigade, 1 Royal Guard brigade, and 8 artillery battalions. The army also has 1 aviation command with 2 aviation brigades. Moving on to number 9, we have Vietnam with the People's Army of Vietnam. Vietnam ranks number 9 in this episode with a total active personnel count of 482,000 people. Now, in the backdrop of the resurgent China, the Social Republic of Vietnam has been strengthening its armed forces. Now, the organizations and establishments of the People's Army of Vietnam started way back in 1944, all to remove the French colonial forces as well as the Japanese occupiers under the guidance of Ho Chi Minh. Their army is made up of course, their ground force, their navy, their air force, the border defense force, as well as coast guards. However, Vietnam does not have a separate ground force or army branch. It's kind of like all put together in one. Number 8 brings us Iran with their Islamic Republic of Iran army. Iran comes in at number 8 in this episode, and they have a total active personnel of 523,000. When it comes to the modern history of Iran, the Iranian army was founded about 100 years ago, and the current form, the Islamic Republic, is a little less younger than that. Now, their headquarters are located in Tehran, Iran, and the mission is to protect territorial integrity of the Iranian state from external and internal threats. Now, the Iranian army, or the Artesh as they're called in Persian, has its own joint staff which coordinates its 4 separate service branches, and those are the ground forces, air force, the navy, and there's also the air defense forces. South Korea comes in at number 7, and their army is the Republic of Korea Army. They have a total active personnel count of 625,000. Now, the Republic of Korea Armed Forces was founded on August 15th, 1948, and their headquarters are in Seoul, South Korea. They were formally organized into 3 armies, the 1st Army, the 3rd Army, and the 2nd Operational Command. Now, each of them had their own headquarters, their own corps, and their own divisions. After restructuring, though, the 2nd Army was converted as the 2nd Operations Command, and that was in the year 2007, and the 1st and the 3rd Armies were merged as the Ground Operations Command, and that happened very recently in 2019. The Pakistan Army is at number 6, and they have a total personnel count of 654,000. Their army came into existence on August 14th, 1947, and it has its headquarters in Rawalpindi, Pakistan. The army's primary objective is of national security and national unity. And the Pakistani army is a voluntary force, and the army during disasters and emergency conducts humanitarian rescue operations at home, as well as participates in peacekeeping missions in different parts of the world. Pakistan also has the most amount of women in an army among the Islamic countries. Alright, so moving on to number 5, we have the ground forces of the Russian Federation. Russia has a total active personnel count of 1,013,628, and of course it's 5th on this list. The army was founded in the year 1992, and its major structural reorganization began in the year 2009. The Russian Ministry of Defense has its own headquarters at Moscow, and the main command of the ground forces consists of the main staff of the ground troops and the department force for peacekeeping forces. There's also the armaments of the ground troops and the rare services of the ground troops. There's the cadres of the ground forces troops, indoctrination work, as well as military education. And the branches of service include motorized rifles, tanks, artillery and rocket forces, troop air defense, special corps, reconnaissance signals, radio electronic warfare, engineering, nuclear, biological and chemical protection, logistical support, automobile, as well as the protection of their rear. There's also military units and logistics establishments. A whole lot going on in Russia's army. The nation coming at number 4 is North Korea. Their army is called the Korean People's Army Ground Forces. Now, North Korea has a total active personnel of 1,280,000. Their army is believed to have been founded back in the year 1932, and their headquarters are located at Pyongyang in North Korea. Their army consists of 5 branches. There's the ground force, the navy, the air force, and the strategic rocket forces, as well as the special operations. All right, guys, 3 nations left, and coming in at the number 3 spot, we have the United States with the United States Army. So the United States is very well equipped, and it has a total active personnel count of 1,281,900 people. The Army was founded over 200 years ago, and the US Army is the 3rd largest in the entire world. Now, the mission of the Army includes preserving the peace and security, as well as providing for the defense of the United States and the Commonwealths, as well as the possessions and areas occupied by the United States. Now, its headquarters are at Arlington County in Virginia in the United States, and it's the largest military branch of the United States Armed Forces. The Army is part of the Department of the Army, which is one of 3 military departments of the Department of Defense. But moving on to the nation at number 2 with the second largest army in the world, the Indian Army. They have a total active personnel count of 1,362,500. Their army headquarters are located in New Delhi, India, and initially the army's objective was to defend the nation's frontiers. Now, over the years now, the responsibility of protecting the country internally began to develop more and more. It has an all-volunteer force, and it comprises of more than 80% of the country's active defense personnel. The Army is still looking to expand, as they have embarked on an infantry modernization program known as Futuristic Infantry Soldier as a System. And it's also requiring new assets for its armored artillery as well as aviation branches. But India is not large enough to take the number 1 spot, because that goes to China and their People's Liberation Army Ground Forces. So China's troops total at 2,183,000. Their mission, of course, is to ensure that China is secured and stays safe. With the continuous advancements in the types of army equipment, as well as having the 2nd largest defense budget in the entire world, China ain't playing around. The army is the largest as well as the oldest branch of the Republic of China's armed forces, and there are 13 core-sized army groups of China since the end of April 2017. Now, they're divided among 5 theater commands: the Eastern, Southern, Northern, Western, and Central commands. Within the theater command, starting in 2011, the divisions are being downsized into full brigades: armored, mechanized infantry, field artillery, air defense artillery, engineering, as well as logistical brigades. At number 10, we got the country of Morocco. So Morocco has the 5th largest armed forces in the entire region. It sits at 175,000 personnel, but it really faces a lot of challenges by one of the lowest defense budgets in the entire Middle East. The country does have a military that's heavily engaged with the disputed Western Sahara territory, as well as its patrolling its borders. Their motto is God, Homeland, King. They have 1,109 combat tanks, 2,720 armored fighting vehicles, 530 self-propelled artillery, 198 towed artillery, and their rocket projectors sit at a total of 72. Moving on to number 9, we have Syria. The Syrian army makes up approximately 80% of the combined services. It officially came into being in 1945 before Syria obtained full independence the following year. The Syrian army, as well as the rest of its armed forces, has been heavily involved in suppressing political movements within Syria. Their motto is Guardians of the Homeland. When it comes to the total combat tanks, they have 5,035. Their armored fighting vehicles count sits at 5,170. They got 500 self-propelled artillery. Their towed artillery sit at 2,210, and they have 700 rocket projectors in their possession. Malaysia is at number 8. The King of Malaysia is the supreme commander of the Malaysian Armed Forces. Now, the Malaysian Army currently has 17 corps and regiments. These are grouped into three main components. There's a combat element, the combat support element, and the support elements. The corps and regiments are currently organized into 5 divisions. The first military units in Malaysia can be traced back to March of 1861. Now, the modern Malaysian Army came about in January of 1933. Their motto is strong and loyal. Now, they have 74 combat tanks in their possession. They have a total of 1,460 armored fighting vehicles, 29 self-propelled artillery, 211 towed artillery, and 54 rocket projectors. Moving on now to number 7, we got the country of Algeria. Their army includes 2 armored and 3 mechanized divisions. And the Land Forces Command is charged with organizing and preparing the land forces so as to ensure the defense of the national land space in cooperation with other forces. Their land forces is comprised of a central command, military and operational sectors, big units and autonomous units, as well as training institutions. The motto of the Algerian nation is by the people and for the people. They have 2,475 combat tanks, 6,900 armored fighting vehicles in total. Their self-propelled artillery are totaled at 400, and they have 583 towed artillery. They also have 367 rocket projectors. Now, number 6, Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabian army is the largest branch of the Saudi armed forces. Now, I didn't find a motto specifically for the Saudi Arabian army, but the motto for the country is there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of God. And they have been active since 1744 as an independent service arm, but they have been an official branch of the armed forces since 1902. Now, back in the year 2000, Saudi Arabia's government spent billions of dollars to expand the Saudis' forces, including the Saudi army. Unfortunately, a lot of the modern equipment is still not fully used to its full potential. In any case, they have 1,062 combat tanks. They have 11,100 armored fighting vehicles, a whole lot of them. Self-propelled artillery total at 705. Towed artillery sits at 1,818, and they have 122 rocket projectors. Halfway in at number 5, we have Indonesia. So the Indonesian army is composed of a headquarters, 15 military region commands, a strategic reserve command, a special forces command, as well as various other units. Now, there are today 5 types of infantry battalions in the Indonesian army, which are the Power Raider Infantry Battalion, Mechanized Raider Infantry Battalion, then they have the Raider Infantry Battalion, and then the Mechanized Infantry Battalion, and then finally the Infantry Battalion. A whole lot of infantry and battalions. Now, their motto is unmatchable bird with noble goals. They have 315 combat tanks in their possession, and they also have 1,300 armored fighting vehicles, 141 self-propelled artillery, 356 towed artillery, and 36 rocket projectors. Number 4 is the country of Pakistan. The Pakistan Army is a voluntary force, and the primary objective and its constitutional mission is to ensure the national security as well as the national unity of Pakistan. It conducts humanitarian rescue operations at home as well as participates in peacekeeping missions mandated by the United Nations. The 2 main branches of the army are the combat arms and the administrative services. Also consists of several branches that include the army officers, the junior commissioned or warrant officers, and other enlisted personnel. Their motto is a follower of none but Allah, the fear of Allah, strive for Allah. Pakistan's army has 2,200 combat tanks, 3,665 armored fighting vehicles, 429 self-propelled artillery, 1,226 towed artillery, and a total of 150 rocket projectors. Now, the nation coming in at number 3 is Iran. The Iranian army, or the Artesh, has its own joint staff which coordinates its 4 separate service branches, which are the ground forces, the air force, the Navy, and the newly established Air Defense Force. And the Iranian army fought 2 major invasions in the modern era. And the first time in 1941, it was the invasion by the Soviet and the British forces during World War II. And the second time was in 1980, and that was the Iraqi invasion, which lasted almost 8 years. Their motto is, "And our soldiers, they verily would be the victors." They have 1,632 combat tanks, 2,345 armored fighting vehicles, 570 self-propelled artillery, 2,128 towed artillery, and 1,900 rocket projectors. Now the nation coming in at number 2, Egypt. The Egyptian army is the largest service branch within the Egyptian armed forces. The Egyptian armed forces chief of staff's office is in Cairo, and he is the chief of staff of the army. It has 3 command and control headquarters as well as 9 command and control field headquarters, and they're directed from the chief of staff's office. Its most significant engagements happened in the 20th century, and these were the 5 wars that Egypt had with Israel, and they were in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1967 to 1970, as well as in 1973. Their motto is, "We painted the face of our nation on our hearts." They have in their possession 2,160 combat tanks, 5,735 armored fighting vehicles, 1,000 self-propelled artillery, 2,189 towed artillery, and 1,100 rocket projectors. And finally, the number 1 most powerful Muslim country when it comes to their army is Turkey. When it comes to Turkey's army, sources trace the army's foundation to Modu Chanyu of the Xiongnu Empire in 209 BC. But the modern history of the army began with its formation after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. As of late 2015, there's reports that suggested that Turkish army, along with the rest of their armed forces, have seen their personnel strength increase to similar levels of the 2000s. Now the factors contributing to this are further stabilization of Syria and Iraq. Now their motto is peace at home, peace in the world. They have 3,200 combat tanks, 9,500 armored fighting vehicles, 1,120 self-propelled artillery. Their total artillery counts sit at 1,272, and they have 350 rocket projectors.